Morbid Facts. Christina Formella, a 30-year-old special ed teacher and soccer coach at a high school in Illinois, is facing 55 felony charges tied to alleged misconduct with a student that reportedly began when he was just 14 years old. Authorities claim the inappropriate relationship lasted nearly 2 years and involved over 50 encounters, many occurring on school grounds during class hours and some at the teacher's own home while her husband was away. The case began after the student's mother found concerning messages on the boy's phone, prompting Formella's arrest in March of 2025. Investigators later uncovered writings where Formella accused the student of cheating on her and even mentioned plans to take her husband's money and disappear. But despite these allegations, her husband has continued to stand by her, even accompanying her to court appearances while holding her hand. Formella has pleaded not guilty to her charges and is out on bond under strict conditions. If convicted, she faces up to 60 years in prison. In 2021, 16-year-old Kennedy Littledyke was ejected from her car during a high-speed crash in Idaho, miraculously landing on a 30-foot high power line dangling upside down by her now broken leg. The pressure from the wire pinched her femoral artery, preventing her from bleeding out, while an electrical burn cauterized another wound in her neck. She hung there for about an hour until rescuers finally cut the power and freed her. Despite having 21 surgeries and losing her leg, Kennedy miraculously survived and now shares her story and journey to recovery to inspire others online. In 2020, 16-year-old promising soccer player Alexander Gomez was tragically shot and killed by police in Mexico after officers allegedly mistook him for a criminal when he was riding his motorcycle to buy a soda. The killing sparked national outrage and drew attention to police violence in Mexico. At the boy's funeral, his teammates honored him by placing his coffin in front of a goalpost and gently kicking a soccer ball against it to score his final goal, a moving tribute to a life full of promise that was cut tragically short. Before he was a convicted felon, NFL star quarterback Michael Vick was secretly running a brutal dogfighting ring on his own property in Virginia. For years, he and his associates bred pit bulls for violent, high-stakes fights, and when the dogs underperformed, they were tortured and killed in some of the most sadistic ways imaginable. Vick admitted to personally helping drown, beat, hang, shoot, and even electrocute dogs to death. One of the most disturbing methods involved clipping jumper cables to a dog's body and lowering it into a shallow pool of water until the animal died in agony. When the operation was finally exposed, Vick served 23 months in prison, losing his career, endorsements, and nearly $100 million. Over 70 dogs were rescued from the compound, many scarred for life and too damaged to recover, though some were rehabilitated and adopted into loving homes. Despite Vick's eventual return to the NFL and carefully staged public apologies, the cruelty he oversaw left a permanent stain on his legacy. In the months leading up to his death, actor and comedian Chris Farley was visibly deteriorating, sweating profusely, coughing up blood, and often unable to walk without assistance. His appearances on SNL and late-night shows became increasingly erratic as producers began to fear he might die right on set. On December 18, 1997, he was found face down in his Chicago apartment wearing only a shirt after several days of binging on alcohol and hard drugs. The last person to see him alive was a sex worker he had hired named Heidi Hauser. As she was leaving, Farley reportedly followed her down the hall while begging her, "Don't leave me, please don't leave me," which were likely his final words. The cause of death was a speedball overdose, a lethal mix of cocaine and morphine. Eerily, Farley idolized John Belushi and always said he wanted to be just like him, even saying in sketches, "I'll probably go out like Belushi." Both comedians died of speedball overdoses at the young age of 33. Here are some morbid facts about Ozzy Osbourne. During a January concert in 1982, Ozzy bit the head off of a bat that was thrown on stage. Ozzy claims he thought it was rubber, but it was actually a live bat that forced him to be treated for rabies. One night in 1989, at the height of his drug addiction, Ozzy randomly told his wife Sharon, "We've come to a decision that you have to die." He then lunged at her and began choking her before Sharon managed to press the panic button under her table, and the next thing she knew, Ozzy was gone and the cops had arrived. She was later quoted saying, "I had no idea who was sat across me on the sofa, but it wasn't my husband. He goes to a state where he gets a look in his eyes where his shutters are down, and I couldn't get through to him." Ozzy said he had no recollection of the event, and Sharon dropped all charges. After an ATV accident in 2003, Ozzy stopped breathing and was technically dead for about 2 minutes before being revived. The crash left him with a broken collarbone, ribs, and neck vertebrae, and his heart reportedly stopped during surgery. Between this incident, several tour accidents, drug-induced seizures, falls, and multiple surgeries, Ozzy now has permanent nerve damage and a metal rod in his spine. He's admitted that even just standing up without help is a massive struggle. In 1982, while wearing his wife Sharon's dress during a photo shoot near the Texas Alamo, Ozzy drunkenly urinated at a memorial erected in honor of those who died at the famous battle. Ozzy was arrested and ended up being banned from the city of San Antonio for a decade. While on tour with Motley Crue in 1984, Ozzy asked Nikki Sixx for a line of cocaine. Upon being told there was none left, Ozzy grabbed a straw and proceeded to snort some ants off the ground. Nikki later confessed, "From that moment on, we knew there was always someone who was sicker and more disgusting than we were." During a drug-fueled breakdown, Ozzy once shot all of his family's cats and then sat under a piano for hours with a knife and a shotgun, waiting for Sharon to come home. He later described it as the lowest point of his addiction and the moment he realized he had completely lost control. In the early 1980s, Ozzy hired a performer named John Edward Allen, a dwarf actor who appeared in Blade Runner, and nicknamed him Ronnie to mock rival singer Ronnie James Dio. As part of Ozzy's live shows, Allen was theatrically hung from a noose on stage every night during the Diary of a Madman tour. Allen struggled with alcoholism throughout his life and died from a drug overdose in 1999 at the age of 50. In 2010, Ozzy had his genome sequenced to determine how it was possible for him to still be alive after so many years of abusing his body. Researchers found mutations related to addiction, metabolism, and Ozzy's Neanderthal ancestors. In fact, he carries several 100,000 genetic variants that had never been seen before by scientists. Meaning if Ozzy wasn't a literal mutant, he likely would have died decades ago, but is still breathing at the ripe age of 76. In August of 2004, 21-year-old Josh Hutcherson and his longtime friend 23-year-old Frankie Brome spent the night drinking at a bar in Georgia. On the drive home, Brome leaned his head outside the passenger side window, apparently to get some fresh air. At the same time, Hutcherson, heavily intoxicated with a blood alcohol level around .22, veered off the road and struck a support wire for a telephone pole, decapitating Brome instantly. Apparently unaware of what had happened, Hutcherson drove more than 10 miles home, parked the truck with Brome's headless body still inside, and went to bed. The next morning, a neighbor discovered the body still inside the vehicle, and Brome's head was later recovered from the crash site. Hutcherson was charged with vehicular homicide and pleaded guilty in 2005, receiving a 5-year sentence. In a surprising twist, Brome's family, who had known Hutcherson for years, publicly asked the court for some leniency, stating they didn't want Hutcherson imprisoned. In 2020, Tim Bleefnick appeared on Family Feud and joked that the biggest mistake he made at his wedding was saying, "I do."
What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding? Honey, I love you, but said I do. Not my mistake. Not my mistake. I love my wife.
But 3 years later, in February of 2023, his estranged wife Rebecca Bleefnick was found shot 14 times in their home while their 3 young boys were upstairs. The couple had apparently been going through a bitter divorce, and Tim went to the extreme to deal with it. He was arrested, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When 36-year-old Heather McManamy was diagnosed with terminal cancer, she began writing dozens of greeting cards for her young daughter to open in the years after she was gone, covering birthdays, graduations, heartbreaks, and even her wedding day. Each card was filled with love, jokes, and advice, allowing her daughter to still receive words of comfort and celebration long after Heather's death in 2015. It was her way of staying present for every milestone she knew she wouldn't live to see. Dr. Fauci's NIH division, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, funded a series of horrific experiments on beagle puppies between 2016 and 2020. One of the most graphic studies involved dogs placed in mesh cages while sandflies were allowed to bite and feed on their heads, allegedly to study how certain parasites are transmitted in hopes of improving treatments for parasitic infections affecting humans. Some dogs were reportedly devocalized to prevent barking and were euthanized at the end of the studies. While Fauci wasn't personally conducting the tests, his agency approved the funding of about $375,000 for the research. Critics, including lawmakers and animal rights groups, condemned the studies as unnecessarily cruel and accused the NIH of lacking transparency and ethical oversight in approving such horrific procedures. The incident sparked widespread outrage online, with many calling for Dr. Fauci to be held responsible for the funding decisions made under his leadership. Coach Tyler Wall was a 38-year-old fitness mentor who played a central role in Mr. Beast's recent video, Lose 100 Pounds, Win $250,000, where he trained contestant Maj in a grueling months-long weight loss journey. Tyler provided constant support physically and emotionally as Maj fought to shed over 100 pounds. But tragically, midway through filming, Coach Wall was found dead in his Greenville, North Carolina apartment on February 18, 2025. His death was described as sudden and unexpected, with no official cause publicly disclosed. Completely devastated, the Mr. Beast team gave Maj the choice to stop the challenge, but he chose to continue in honor of his late coach. Maj ultimately completed the drastic transformation, dropping from 324 pounds to 222, achieving the goal he and his coach set out to reach together. Despite initial hesitation, the Mr. Beast team chose to release the video with a tribute honoring Tyler's impact, ending with the words, "In loving memory of Coach Tyler Wall." Before becoming one of boxing's most infamous promoters, Don King was no stranger to violence. In 1954, he shot and killed a man who was allegedly trying to rob one of King's gambling operations. The killing was ruled self-defense and King walked free. But in 1966, he was involved in a far more brutal incident, stomping a man to death over a $600 gambling debt. He was convicted of manslaughter and served only 4 years in prison. After his release, King quickly climbed the ranks of the pro boxing world, building a multi-million-dollar empire despite the bodies he left behind. In 2001, an elderly Japanese man named Tatsuo Osako passed away quietly at the age of 88. It wasn't until after his death that people discovered he had helped over 2,000 Jewish refugees escape Nazi persecution during World War II by quietly stamping their travel documents and sheep-herding them onto ships bound for safety. He never spoke of his actions, kept no accolades, and lived a modest life as a travel agent. His family only found out that he'd secretly saved thousands of lives after discovering old photos and records that were tucked away in his home. Mark Hofmann was a skilled forger who gained notoriety in 1980s Utah by selling fake historical documents, many of which targeted early Mormon history. His most infamous creation, the Salamander Letter, falsely claimed that Joseph Smith's divine revelations involved a magical salamander, casting the origins of the Latter-day Saints Church in a bizarre and controversial light. Hofmann sold these forgeries for tens of thousands of dollars, duping collectors, historians, and even high-ranking church officials. But as demand grew, he began accepting payments for documents he hadn't yet forged, falling deep into debt. When clients started questioning delays in authenticity, Hofmann resorted to violence, killing 2 people with homemade bombs before accidentally injuring himself while attempting to plant a third. Although mangled, he survived and later pled guilty to murder and fraud. Now 70 years old, he's been in prison since 1987 and will likely remain there for the rest of his life. There were countless serious warning signs leading up to the implosion of the OceanGate Titan submersible. Experts repeatedly flagged the vessel's experimental design, particularly its carbon fiber hull, which is prone to microscopic weaknesses under deep-sea pressure. Former OceanGate employees raised alarms about structural integrity, previous dive malfunctions, the fact that the sub's navigation system relied on a modded Xbox controller, and over 100 documented equipment issues, including a 2022 incident where passengers heard alarming cracking sounds as the pressure increased. But despite this, OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush pushed forward, publicly dismissing regulation as a barrier to innovation. In fact, the warning signs were so clearly numerous that after the implosion, many have speculated, citing his repeated disregard for safety warnings and his presence on board during the fatal dive, though no evidence has officially confirmed this theory. Known online as Pioneers Productions, Randy Stair became obsessed with the cartoon Danny Phantom and was convinced that he'd be reincarnated as a character on the show named Ember. While working a night shift at a grocery store in Pennsylvania, he blocked all the exits, pulled out 2 shotguns, and murdered 3 coworkers in the frozen foods aisle. Police later uncovered a trove of videos and writings outlining his delusions and plans, in which he explained his belief that these murders would allow him to cross over into the animated world of Danny Phantom. Decades of intense drumming took a brutal toll on Phil Collins' body, causing such severe nerve damage that he could no longer hold onto drumsticks. After spinal surgery in 2009, Collins lost much of the feeling in his hands and was forced to give up drumming entirely. The loss devastated him to the point where he contemplated taking his own life. In 1974, Stanford student Arliss Perry was found murdered in a campus chapel, posed kneeling at the altar with a candle stuck inside her body in what appeared to be a ritualistic killing. The case went cold for decades until in 2018, DNA linked it to a campus security guard. Police attempted to arrest him. In 2021, during a wedding ceremony in Uttar Pradesh, India, a bride named Sarabi collapsed from a heart attack and was pronounced dead shortly afterwards. But instead of canceling the expensive event, both families agreed to continue the wedding by marrying the groom to Sarabi's younger sister, Nisha. The ceremony went on while Sarabi's body was placed in another room in the house. The incident shocked many and was confirmed by local news and relatives, who watched in total disbelief as a wedding and funeral unfolded under the same roof. In 1993, a Mexican zoo official was arrested in Miami after trying to illegally purchase a live gorilla, only to discover the animal was actually an undercover agent in a gorilla suit. The operation was part of a federal wildlife trafficking bust and led to one of the most ridiculous arrests in American history. As a child in the Philippines, boxing legend Manny Pacquiao ran away from home after witnessing a horrifying act. His father, drunken and enraged, killed and ate the family's pet dog. Devastated, Pacquiao fled and began living on the streets, sleeping in a cardboard box and surviving by selling donuts and scraps. The trauma of watching that happen to his beloved pet pushed him into a life of brutal survival at just 12 years old, an early glimpse of the hardship and violence that would define his relentless drive in the ring. Tara Correa McMullen was a rising young actress best known for playing a gang-affiliated teen on Judging Amy, but in a cruel twist of fate, her real life began to mirror her on-screen role. At just 16, she started dating a 26-year-old member of the Crips and moved into gang territory in Inglewood, California. In 2005, she was gunned down outside of her apartment in a gang-related shooting, struck multiple times and left to die on the sidewalk. The man who killed her was later sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without parole. In 2011, 48-year-old New Zealand truck driver Stephen McCormick slipped between the cab and trailer of his truck and landed ass first onto a compressed air hose. The metal nozzle pierced his left cheek and began blasting air into his body at around 100 psi. But instead of entering his bloodstream, which would have killed him instantly, the air forced its way beneath his skin, inflating him like a balloon and separating his fat from muscle tissue. His body swelled rapidly while his skin became dangerously tight as paramedics rushed him to the hospital. Doctors managed to relieve the pressure and stabilize him, and against all odds, McCormick survived the freak accident without any permanent damage. Before launching Punk'd, Ashton Kutcher was developing a much darker hidden camera show called Harassment. In 2002, one of its earliest pranks involved staging a gruesome fake murder scene inside a Las Vegas hotel room, complete with a very realistic, bloody, lifeless corpse. 2 unsuspecting guests walked in, believed they had discovered a real dead body, and were left completely traumatized. The stunt triggered a $10 million lawsuit against Kutcher, MTV, and the hotel, forcing the network to shut down the show before even airing a single episode. The backlash was so severe that Harassment was scrapped entirely, leading to the creation of the far tamer celebrity prank show Punk'd. In 2007, a Massachusetts state employee named Michael Fiola was nearly sent to prison after countless files of child porn were discovered on his work-issued laptop. He was immediately fired and charged, facing years behind bars, until forensic experts discovered that the device had actually been infected with a virus that automatically visited up to 40 CP sites per minute, even when he was nowhere near it. The activity was so extreme and constant that it proved impossible for a human to replicate, ultimately clearing Fiola's name. Though the charges were dropped, Michael and his wife spent nearly $250,000 defending him from an awful crime he never committed. The biggest frauds of all time. Elizabeth Holmes founded the company Theranos in 2003, claiming her device could run hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood. At its peak, the company was valued at $9 billion, but it was all an elaborate lie. The technology never worked, test results endangered patients, and Holmes was convicted of fraud in one of the biggest corporate scandals of modern times. In 2023, she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. In the 1990s, Nigerian conman Emmanuel Nwudi scammed a massive Brazilian bank out of $242 million by selling them a Nigerian airport that never existed. Posing as a top banking official, he used forged documents and fake phone calls to convince executives they were funding an incredible deal. The fraud ran for years before auditors finally exposed it. Nwudi was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but much of the money was never recovered. Tanya Head became president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network after gaining fame for her harrowing survival story. She claimed to have barely escaped the collapse of the South Tower, suffering third-degree burns while crawling through smoke and flames, while watching several colleagues die around her, including her own fiancé, whose body was never recovered. She led tours of Ground Zero for grieving families, gave emotional public speeches, and became an inspiring face of 9/11 remembrance. But in 2007, it was finally exposed that she wasn't even in America on 9/11. Her entire story, right down to the dead fiancé, was all an elaborate lie. Milli Vanilli became global pop stars in the late 80s, winning a Grammy with hits like Girl You Know It's True. But in 1990, it was exposed that the duo had never sung a single note on their own records or during live shows. They were always lip-syncing to tracks recorded by studio singers. Their Grammy was revoked, albums were pulled from stores, and the scandal became one of the most infamous frauds in music history. Belle Gibson built a global wellness brand by claiming she had cured her terminal brain cancer through diet and natural remedies. But in 2015, journalists revealed she never actually had cancer at all and also lied about donating to charity. The scam made her millions but ended in total disgrace. She was fined 400,000 Australian dollars for misleading customers, and her wellness empire completely collapsed. In the early 2000s, Rudy Kurniawan became one of the world's top rare wine sellers, moving millions of dollars worth of supposedly priceless bottles to elite collectors. But behind the scenes, he was running the biggest wine fraud in modern history. Rudy refilled bottles with cheap blends, forged labels, and even used UV light to adjust his fakes so that they'd fool collectors' authentication tools. In 2012, the FBI raided his home and found an entire wine forgery lab, stacks of empty bottles, fake labels, corking machines, and a massive stockpile of cheap wine. In 2014, Rudy was sentenced to 10 years in prison in order to repay all $28.4 million. But to this day, some of his fakes are still sitting undiscovered in the world's finest wine collections. These are the dirtiest facts about history that they'll never teach you in school. In her famous diary, Anne Frank originally wrote many explicit details involving her lady parts, menstruation, pleasuring herself, and hinting that she may have been bisexual. Her father Otto cut those parts out. The Roman Emperor Nero accidentally killed his pregnant wife by kicking her to death. He then found a young boy who looked exactly like her, castrated him, then married him. From the 1940s to the 70s, many Ivy League colleges, including Yale, Harvard, and Princeton, required all incoming freshmen to have nude photos taken of them. The administrators claimed it was to gauge the rate of conditions like rickets and scoliosis, but many believe the true reason behind them was much creepier. Most of the photos have since been destroyed, but thousands still remain in the Smithsonian's possession. The Italian painter Raphael, who inspired the name of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, is believed to have died from exhaustion brought on by non-stop intercourse with various women. Our ancient ancestors definitely had their priorities in check, considering the dildo was invented some 20,000 years before the wheel. Early colonizers of the United States used corn cobs as toilet paper, since they were soft, plentiful, and the grooves were quite efficient at getting the job done. In the early 1900s, King Edward VII had a custom-made love chair. The chair allowed the 300-pound man to indulge in his sexual fantasies without crushing his female partners. When Pocahontas was 12 years old, she would entertain white colonists by doing cartwheels without wearing any clothes. This is one of the few things we know about her that's indisputable due to so many written accounts. Former Vice President Nelson Rockefeller suffered a heart attack and died while having intercourse with his 25-year-old assistant. He was 70 years old at the time. Female mummies found in ancient Egypt are always far more decomposed than their male counterparts. This is because male bodies were embalmed a lot sooner than female bodies, which were often kept hidden for several days until they started to rot. The reason was to discourage the embalmers from engaging in necrophilia with the bodies. King Charles II of Spain, the product of 200 years of royal inbreeding intended to strengthen the family line, was so deformed he couldn't walk properly, was breastfed until the age of 4, and remained illiterate for his entire life. He survived a slew of childhood diseases but grew into a man with a disfigured jaw, enlarged tongue, and grotesque appearance that terrified even his own wife. His autopsy revealed a heart the size of a peppercorn, gangrenous intestines, a single testicle black as coal, and a skull filled with fluid. According to a 1992 biography, before she married Ronald, Nancy Reagan was known around Hollywood for giving the best head. She was reportedly known as Just Say Yes Nancy, and was very popular on the MGM lot for her glucking abilities. When he was in his 70s, Gandhi went to the extreme to test his sexual celibacy as part of his religion. He would conduct experiments where he would sleep naked with teenage girls and refrain from touching them. Gandhi claimed these tests were his moral duty. JFK and Hitler may very well have been Eskimo bros, since they both dated Miss Denmark Inga Arvad at different times. In ancient Greece, large trouser snakes were shunned since they were seen as a sign of lust and degeneracy, while little dinky winkies were seen as a sign of self-control and civility. This is why many statues of Greek heroes have tiny schlongs, while evil figures from mythology are often depicted with hammers. In the 19th century, doctors would perform pelvic massages to treat hysteria in women. Essentially, women would be finger-banged until they reached hysterical paroxysm, aka climax. But these treatments were often time-consuming and gave many doctors carpal tunnel, thus the vibrator was born. Here's an example of a Japanese bunraku puppet that was used in theaters across Osaka throughout the early 1600s.